Every quantum shift you've attempted worked. The technique functioned. The frequency changed. And then, 72 hours later, you're back exactly where you started. This isn't resistance. It's an identity leak you don't know you have. Let me show you what I mean. You do the visualization. You feel it. I mean, you genuinely feel different, lighter, more expansive. You can sense the shift happening in real time. Your body responds. Your energy changes. Something fundamental just moved. And you absolutely know, this time it's different. This time it's real. Then you wake up the next morning and it's gone. Not faded, gone, like it never happened. Or maybe it lasts a few days. You're walking around in this new state, responding differently, feeling different, and then suddenly, without warning, you're right back in the old pattern, the old frequency, the old reactions, and it doesn't feel like you slipped. It feels like you were snapped back. Here's what nobody's telling you about this. The technique isn't the problem. Your visualization was fine. Your affirmations were fine. The frequency shift was real. It actually happened. The field registered it. Your nervous system registered it. The change occurred at the quantum level, exactly as it was supposed to, and then your identity rejected it, not your conscious mind, not your willpower, not your belief or your commitment or your consistency. Your identity, the core quantum signature of who you are, ran an immune response against the new frequency and pulled you back to baseline. Because here's what's actually happening. Your identity isn't just a concept. It's a stable quantum state, a collapsed waveform that your subconscious recognizes as you, and that state has coherence. It has momentum. It has what we might call quantum inertia. When you attempt to shift to a new frequency, you're not just changing your thoughts or your energy. You're attempting to destabilize a collapsed state that's been reinforced through thousands of measurements. Every past decision you've made, every reaction you've had, every choice, every behavior, those are all measurements that collapsed your identity into its current configuration, and your subconscious treats that configuration like your body treats your blood type. It's not negotiable. It's not optional. It's identity data. So when you shift to a new frequency, your subconscious doesn't see growth. It sees contamination. It sees foreign tissue. And it activates an immune response to restore coherence to the original state. This is why you can have profound breakthrough experiences that vanish by morning. This is why the new you lasts exactly long enough for you to believe it worked, and then evaporates. This is why you feel like you're constantly relearning the same lessons, having the same realizations, making the same commitments, and nothing actually sticks. You're not failing. You're leaking, and the leak is happening at the identity level. Let me give you the recognition markers so you can see this in your own experience. You've had those meditation sessions or visualization practices where you genuinely accessed a different state. Not imagination, not pretending. You were there. You felt expanded, clear, certain. The shift was palpable. And then you go about your day, and within hours, sometimes minutes, it's like that state never existed. You can remember it, but you can't access it. You're back in the default frequency with no bridge back to what you just experienced. Or here's another one. You make a decision from an elevated state. You commit to something. You choose differently, and it feels true. It feels aligned. Then 2 to 4 days later, you're looking at that decision like it was made by a stranger. The energy that made it possible is gone, and now you're stuck executing a choice your current state doesn't support. Or this. You have a genuine shift in how you see yourself, a real identity upgrade. You can feel it integrate. And then you're in a normal situation, talking to someone, making a decision, responding to something mundane, and your old self just takes over. No warning, no transition. You watch yourself operate from the old identity like you never had the breakthrough at all. That's the leak, and here's the part that makes this so insidious. You think you're the problem. You think you're not consistent enough, not committed enough, not believing hard enough. You think if you just did the technique better or longer or with more feeling, it would finally stick, but the technique worked. The shift happened. What didn't happen was identity stabilization. The new frequency never got permission to become your baseline because your subconscious never stopped measuring you as the old version. Every time you felt like success is slippery, like you can touch it but never hold it, that's the identity leak. Every time you've genuinely changed your thoughts but your reality hasn't updated, that's the leak. Every time you've upgraded your perspective only to find yourself acting from the old perspective 48 hours later, that's the leak. You're experiencing quantum decoherence in real time. Your new state is collapsing back to the original configuration because your identity field hasn't actually shifted. You changed the frequency, but you didn't change the signature. And the signature always wins. This is not a motivation problem. This is not a discipline problem. This is a quantum mechanics problem. You're trying to hold a new state while your underlying identity is broadcasting the old one. And in that conflict, the identity frequency is always going to override the temporary state shift. Think of it this way. You can heat water to boiling, but if the ambient temperature is 30 degrees, that water is going back to 30 degrees the moment you stop applying heat. Your techniques are the heat. Your identity is the ambient temperature. And no amount of heating is going to change what happens when you stop applying energy. The water doesn't fail to stay hot. The system is working exactly as designed. It's returning to the baseline that's being held by the environment. Your identity is the environment. And right now, it's set to return you to a frequency you're trying to leave. So every shift you attempt, no matter how real, how powerful, how genuine, is temporary unless the identity itself changes. You can access elevated states. You can touch higher frequencies. You can even live there for days. But you'll always leak back to baseline because baseline is where your identity is anchored. And here's where this gets precise. Because the identity leak isn't happening because you're blocked, or because you have limiting beliefs, or because you're not spiritual enough. It's happening because your identity has a function you don't know about. Your subconscious is running an immune system for your identity. And every time you shift frequencies, it's checking to see if the new frequency matches the identity signature on file. When it doesn't match, it flags it as an anomaly. And then it does what immune systems do. It attacks the foreign element and restores the original state. This isn't sabotage. This is a coherence protection mechanism. Your identity is a stable quantum state, and your subconscious is protecting that stability. The stronger the shift you attempt, the stronger the immune response. The more different the new frequency is from your baseline, the faster you'll be pulled back. Because here's what nobody tells you about quantum shifts. The technique isn't the problem. Your identity is running an immune system against the very change you're trying to create. And until you understand how that immune system works, and more importantly, why your subconscious keeps measuring you as the old version, every shift you attempt is going to leak, which means the question isn't, how do I make the shift stick? The question is, why does my subconscious keep collapsing me back to who I was? And that answer is about to change everything you think you know about identity, frequency, and quantum states. Because your subconscious isn't tracking who you're becoming. It's tracking something else entirely. And that something is more powerful than any visualization, any affirmation, any technique you'll ever use. We're going there next. Your identity has a return address, and every time you attempt to shift frequencies, your subconscious is checking the mail. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you shift to a new frequency, when you visualize yourself as confident, or abundant, or powerful, or whatever the shift is, you're not just thinking new thoughts. You're attempting to exist in a different quantum state. You're trying to broadcast a frequency that doesn't match your current identity signature, and your subconscious has one job. One function it performs with absolute precision, zero exceptions, no negotiation. It maintains identity coherence. Coherence means your quantum state is stable, recognizable, and consistent across measurements. It means when your subconscious checks, who am I? which it does constantly, automatically, below your conscious awareness, it gets the same answer, the same signature, the same collapsed state. That coherence is what allows you to function. It's what gives you a sense of continuity, predictability, self-recognition. Without it, you'd be a different person every moment with no thread connecting one state to the next. So your subconscious protects coherence like your life depends on it. Because in a very real sense, your psychological survival does depend on it. Now here's where this becomes a problem. When you attempt to shift to a new frequency, you're introducing incoherence. You're broadcasting a signal that doesn't match the established identity signature. And your subconscious doesn't interpret that as growth or evolution or expansion. It interprets it as a threat to coherence. Just like your body has an immune system that identifies foreign tissue and attacks it to protect the organism, your identity has an immune system that identifies foreign frequencies and collapses them back to baseline to protect coherence. This isn't sabotage. This isn't your subconscious working against you. This is a protection mechanism functioning exactly as designed. Your current identity, no matter how limited, how painful, how restrictive it feels to your conscious mind, is a stable quantum state. It has eigenvalues. It has defined parameters. It's a collapsed waveform that your nervous system recognizes and can navigate. New frequencies, elevated states, quantum shifts, these register as unstable, as undefined, as threats to the coherent structure your subconscious is maintaining. So what does it do? It runs an immune response. It measures you back to baseline. It collapses the new frequency and restores the original state. And the stronger the shift you attempt, the stronger the immune response. Think about what happens when you try to make a big change. Not a small adjustment, a real transformation. You're going to be confident instead of insecure. You're going to be abundant instead of scarce. You're going to be powerful instead of powerless. That's not a frequency adjustment. That's a complete state change. That's attempting to exist in a quantum configuration so different from your baseline that your subconscious can't even recognize it as you. And what happens? Massive pullback, intense resistance, sudden collapse back to the old state, often with more force than you've ever experienced. You think that's fear. You think that's limiting beliefs. You think that's your shadow or your trauma or your unworthiness coming up. It's not. It's an immune response. Your subconscious is measuring the new frequency, comparing it to the identity signature on file, flagging it as foreign, and attacking it to restore coherence. The bigger the gap between your current identity and the frequency you're attempting to access, the more violent the immune response. Because from your subconscious's perspective, you're not growing. You're being invaded. Let me give you a concrete example so you can see this mechanism in action. Let's say your identity signature is, I'm someone who struggles financially. That's not a thought. That's a collapsed quantum state with years, maybe decades, of measurement data supporting it. Every time you've checked your bank account with anxiety, every time you've said no to something because of money, every time you've felt that contraction around spending, those are measurements that reinforce the coherence of that identity. Now you decide to shift. You visualize abundance. You feel it. You access the frequency of financial ease. And for a moment, you're there. You can sense what it would be like to not have that contraction, that anxiety, that limitation. Your subconscious measures this new state. It checks it against the identity signature. And it finds a mismatch. A massive mismatch. The current signature says, we are someone who struggles with money. We have thousands of data points confirming this. This is a stable, coherent identity state. The new frequency says, actually, we're abundant. Money flows easily. Your subconscious doesn't debate this. It doesn't consider whether the new frequency is better or more desirable or more aligned with your goals. It simply recognizes incoherence and initiates a correction protocol. Within hours, sometimes minutes, you're back in the scarcity frequency. Not because you failed, not because you didn't believe hard enough, Because your identity immune system identified a foreign frequency and collapsed it back to the established baseline. And here's the part that makes this so precise. The immune response isn't random. It's not emotional. It's mechanical. It's your subconscious performing a quantum measurement that collapses your state back to the eigenvalue it recognizes as you. Every time you shift and then snap back, that's not weakness. That's a successful immune response from your subconscious's perspective. It detected incoherence and restored stability. It did its job perfectly. You're not fighting resistance. You're fighting a protection mechanism that's functioning with absolute precision to maintain the quantum state it's been trained to recognize as your identity. Now here's where this gets even more specific. The immune response operates through continuous measurement. Your subconscious isn't checking your identity once a day or once a week. It's measuring constantly. And every measurement is an opportunity to collapse you back to baseline if you've drifted from the established signature. When you're in an elevated state, when you're feeling confident or abundant or powerful, your subconscious is measuring that state against the reference identity. And if the measurement detects incoherence, it collapses you back. This is quantum decoherence happening in real time. You exist in superposition for a brief window. You're both the old identity and the new frequency simultaneously. And then measurement occurs and the superposition collapses to the state with more coherence. Wait, which state has more coherence? Wait, the one with more measurement history, the one your subconscious has been reinforcing for years or decades. Your baseline identity, the new frequency, has no measurement history. It has no coherence weight. It's unmeasured potential, and unmeasured potential always loses to measured history when the quantum state collapses. This is why techniques fail. This is why practices don't stick. This is why you can do everything right and still end up back where you started. You're trying to shift frequencies while your subconscious is running continuous measurements that collapse you back to the identity with the most coherence data. You're fighting quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics doesn't care about your intentions or your visualizations or your commitment. It responds to measurement. And right now, every measurement your subconscious performs is reinforcing your current identity as the coherent state and flagging any deviation as an error to be corrected. So the real question, the question that actually matters, is not how do you shift frequencies. You can do that. You've done that. The real question is, how do you shift frequencies without triggering the identity immune response? How do you introduce a new state without your subconscious measuring it as foreign and collapsing it back to baseline? And the answer to that question requires understanding something about your identity that nobody's told you. Something about how your subconscious determines what's you and what's foreign, because it's not using your current thoughts. It's not using your current feelings. It's not even using your current state. It's using something else. Something with far more measurement weight than anything happening in your present moment. And once you see what that something is, you'll understand why every quantum shift you've attempted has been fighting an invisible anchor you didn't know was there. Your subconscious doesn't track who you're becoming. It tracks who you've been. And it's using historical data to override your present frequency. This is the identity timestamp, and it's more powerful than any affirmation you'll ever speak. Let me show you how this works. When your subconscious needs to determine, who am I? Which, remember, it's doing constantly. It doesn't look at your current intentions. It doesn't check your visualization from this morning. It doesn't reference what you're trying to become. It pulls up your measurement history, your identity dataset. Every decision you've made, every reaction you've had, every choice, every behavior, every response. These aren't just memories. They're data points. And your subconscious uses this accumulated data to calculate your identity signature. Think of it like this. Your identity isn't stored as a concept. It's not filed away as I am confident or I am insecure. It's stored as 10,000 measurements of how you actually Behaved when confidence or insecurity was required. That. Time you stayed quiet in the meeting. Data point. That time you second-guessed your decision. Data point. That time you apologized for something that wasn't your fault. Data point. That time you didn't ask for what you wanted. Data point, thousands of them. Tens of thousands. All accumulated over years or decades, all pointing to the same quantum signature. And when you try to shift to a new frequency, your subconscious doesn't just compare the new frequency to your current state. It compares it to your entire measurement history. Your whole data set. You decide you're confident now. Your subconscious pulls up the data set. 10,000 interactions that say otherwise. The measurement history outweighs the current intention by a factor of 10,000 to 1. You're not fighting your current thoughts. You're fighting your own evidence. And evidence always wins. Here's why this is so catastrophic for quantum shifts. Your measurement history has momentum. It has what we might call quantum inertia. The more data points supporting a particular identity signature, the more stable that signature becomes. The more stable it becomes, the more resistant it is to change. This is why childhood programming is so powerful. It's not that your childhood experiences were more meaningful or more traumatic or more important than your current experiences. It's that they happened first. They established the initial data set, and every subsequent measurement either reinforced that data set or got flagged as an anomaly. If your early measurements determined I'm not good enough, then every time you acted from that frequency, you added another data point to support it. And every time you attempted to act from a different frequency, every time you tried to be confident or assertive or worthy, your subconscious measured it against the established dataset and flagged it as incoherent. The dataset builds on itself. It becomes self-reinforcing, not because you're stuck or because you can't change, but because measurement history creates quantum stability. And stability resists disruption. Now let me show you what this looks like in real time. You're doing your visualization. You're accessing the frequency of abundance. You feel it. You're there. And then you go about your day, and you have to make a spending decision. In that moment, your subconscious doesn't reference your visualization. It references your spending history. How many times have you hesitated before spending? How many times have you checked your bank account with anxiety? How many times have you said, I can't afford that? That's the data set it's pulling from. And that data set has 40 years of measurements. Your visualization from this morning has one. Which frequency do you think wins? You make the decision from scarcity, not because you chose to, not because you forgot your visualization, because your subconscious performed a quantum measurement, compared the present moment to your historical data set, and collapsed you to the state with the most measurement weight. Your behavior matched your history, not your intention. And in doing so, you just added another data point to the scarcity data set. You reinforced the very identity you're trying to leave. This is the identity timestamp. Your sense of who I am is timestamped to your past. It's anchored in historical measurements, and those measurements have more quantum weight than anything you're attempting to do in the present. Here's another example. You decide you're worthy. You affirm it. You feel it. You access that frequency genuinely, then someone treats you poorly, disrespects you, crosses a boundary. In that moment, do you respond from worthiness or from your behavioral history? Your subconscious isn't checking how you feel right now. It's checking how you've responded to disrespect in the past. Have you set boundaries? Have you walked away? Have you demanded better? Or have you tolerated it, explained it away, made excuses for the other person, convinced yourself it wasn't that bad? That's the data set. And that data set is going to determine your response far more powerfully than any affirmation about worthiness. You tolerate the disrespect. You don't set the boundary, not because you're not worthy, but because your measurement history says this is how you respond in these situations. And measurement history overrides present intention every single time. Then you feel bad about it. You think you failed. You think you're not really worthy after all. And you just added another data point to the I tolerate disrespect dataset. The identity timestamp just got reinforced. Again, this is why you can have genuine realizations, real insights, profound shifts in understanding, and still behave exactly the same way when the situation arises. Your realization updated your conscious awareness. It didn't update your measurement history, and your subconscious responds to measurement history, not awareness. You can know you're confident. You can feel confident. You can have accessed the frequency of confidence in meditation or visualization. But if your nervous system has 40 years of shy, hesitant, second-guessing behavior on file, that's the data set that's going to run the show when confidence is required. The historical measurements have quantum coherence. Your new frequency doesn't, not yet. It's just a single data point trying to override thousands of contradicting measurements. It's not going to work. Not because you're doing it wrong, because quantum mechanics doesn't operate on intention. It operates on measurement weight. And right now, all your measurement weight is in the past. Here's what makes this even more insidious. Every time you reference who you are, every time you say, I am anything, your subconscious autofills from the historical dataset, I am, and before you can finish the sentence, your nervous system has already pulled up the measurement, history, and determined what completes that. Statement based on accumulated evidence. You say, I am confident, but your measurement history says, I am someone who has been insecure in 10,000 interactions. Which one do you think your subconscious accepts as true? The measurements. Always the measurements. This is the identity timestamp problem. You're trying to create a future self while your identity is anchored in past evidence. You're attempting to broadcast a new frequency while your subconscious is continuously referencing historical data to determine what frequency is coherent for you and past. Measurements will always outweigh present intentions when your subconscious is calculating identity coherence. This is quantum state entanglement with your own history. You're not free to become something new because you're entangled with every measurement that determined who you were. And those measurements have momentum. The past has quantum weight. The future doesn't. Potential is unmeasured. History is fully collapsed. And when your subconscious chooses between unmeasured potential and collapsed history, it chooses collapsed history every time. Because collapsed states are coherent. Potential is not. So here's what's actually happening when you attempt a quantum shift. You're trying to jump to a new frequency, but you're tethered to historical coordinates. You're attempting to exist in a new identity state, but your subconscious keeps measuring you against the old data set and collapsing you back. The new frequency never had a chance to stabilize because it never had measurement weight. It was always competing against years or decades of contradicting data. And in that competition, the historical data set wins. Not sometimes. Every time. This is the identity lag. You're always operating one version behind who you're trying to become, because your identity is time-stamped to who you've been. And no technique, no visualization, no affirmation is going to overcome that lag, as long as your I am statement defaults to pulling data from your measurement history instead of your present state. So, if your identity is anchored in the past, and your measurement history outweighs your present intention, how do you shift? You don't shift identity. You sever the anchor. You stop referencing the historical data set entirely, because the identity leak doesn't stop when you build a better identity on top of the old one. It stops when you stop being anchored to any historical identity at all. And that process, that severing, requires something most manifestation teachers will never tell you to do. You have to orphan your identity. You have to cut the measurement entanglement with who you were, and we're going there next. The moment your frequency shifts successfully, you do something that instantly corrupts it. And you think you're being self-aware. Here's what happens. You do the practice. The visualization, the meditation, the frequency work, whatever your method is, and it works. You feel the shift. You're lighter, expanded, different. Something fundamental just changed. You can sense it in your body, in your energy, in how you're perceiving reality. The shift is real. It happened. You're in a new state. And then you do the thing that ruins it. You check if it worked. You monitor yourself to see if you've actually changed. You observe the new state to verify it's real. You compare how you feel now to how you felt before. You assess whether the shift is stable or temporary. And in that act of checking, in that moment of observation, you collapse the entire thing. Let me explain the mechanism here, because this is where most people lose the shift without ever knowing what happened. When you check if the shift worked, you're performing a quantum measurement. You're observing yourself, and observation at the quantum level has consequences. The act of observing collapses superposition into a definite state. Before you checked, you were in the new frequency. You were being it. You were existing as that state, without reference, without comparison, without observation. The moment you check, you create an observer-observed split. There's now a you that's observing and a new state that's being observed. You've separated yourself from the shift, and which you is doing the observing. The old identity, the one with all the measurement history, the one your subconscious recognizes as the stable, coherent baseline. You just re-established the old identity as the observer, and the new frequency became something you're observing, something you're doing, not something you are. That split, that separation between observer and observed, is the contamination. That's where the leak happens, because here's what your subconscious registers when you check. It registers that there's a you separate from the shifted state. It registers that you're monitoring whether you've changed, which presupposes that you haven't fully changed yet. It registers that you're still identifying as the old version, checking on the new version, and it collapses you back to the old version. Because that's the one performing the measurement. That's the one with coherence weight. The new frequency was working perfectly until you observed it. The observation killed it. This is the quantum observer effect playing out in your identity. You cannot observe a state without affecting it. And when you observe your own frequency shift, you affect it by re-establishing the old identity as the reference point. Let me give you a concrete example so you can see this in your own experience. You do your morning practice. You access confidence. You feel it integrate. You're walking around in this new state and it's working. You're responding differently. You're carrying yourself differently. The frequency is active. And then you catch yourself. You think, wait, am I actually being confident right now? Is this real or am I just performing it? That question, that checking, just collapsed the state. Because to ask, am I being confident? You have to position yourself as separate from the confidence. There's now a you that's checking and a confidence that's being checked. You've created duality where there was unity, and the you that's checking. That's the old identity, the one that's been insecure for years, the one that knows how to question and doubt and monitor. You just handed control back to the old identity by making it the observer. Within minutes, the confidence is gone. Not because it wasn't real, because you observed it from the wrong reference point. You measured it using the old identity as the instrument, and the measurement collapsed you back to the old state. This happens all the time. You shift successfully and then you check. You verify, you monitor, and every time you do, you're re-establishing the old identity as the observer and the new frequency as something temporary you're trying on. The checking mechanism itself assumes there's a you separate from the shift. And that assumption is catastrophic because it means the shift is something you're doing, not something you are. And anything you're doing requires the old identity to be doing it. Which means the old identity is still in control. Which means the shift was never integrated. It was just a temporary state being maintained by the old version of you. The moment you stop maintaining it, the moment you stop consciously being the new frequency, you snap back. Because the old identity was running the show the whole time. This is why monitoring progress destroys progress. Every time you check how you're doing, you're measuring from the old identity. Every time you verify the shift is working, You're positioning the old version as the observer, and the new version as the thing being observed. And in quantum mechanics, the observer determines the outcome. If your old identity is the observer, your old identity is what's going to collapse into existence. Here's what makes this so insidious. The checking feels responsible. It feels like self-awareness. It feels like you're being conscious and intentional about your growth. Am I really confident or just pretending? Is this shift genuine, or am I just feeling good temporarily? Let me make sure this is actually working. These feel like healthy questions. They feel like you're being honest with yourself, not fooling yourself, not engaging in spiritual bypassing. But every one of those questions is a quantum measurement being performed by your old identity. And every measurement collapses you back. You're not being self-aware. You're being self-observed. And self-observation from the old identity is the fastest way to abort a frequency shift. Because here's what actually happens when you check. You're asking, has the old me become the new me yet? And implicit in that question is the assumption that there's still an old me asking. Which means the old me hasn't gone anywhere. Which means the shift isn't complete. Your subconscious hears that question and registers, the old identity is still active. The old identity is still the reference point. The new frequency is just something being tested, not something that's been integrated, and it collapses you back to what's been integrated, the old identity. The one asking the question, the checking itself confirms you haven't shifted. Because if you had shifted, there would be no one to check. The new state would just be your baseline. You wouldn't be monitoring it because you'd be being it. When you're genuinely in a new identity state, you don't observe it. You don't check it. You don't verify it. You just operate from it naturally. The same way you operate from your current identity now without checking. Do you wake up every morning and verify you're still you? Do you check throughout the day to make sure your identity is stable? No, because your current identity isn't something you observe. It's the lens you observe through. The new frequency needs to become the lens, not the thing being observed through the old lens, but every time you check, you're using the old lens to look at the new frequency. And the old lens can only see the new frequency as foreign, temporary, something being tried on. It can't see it as baseline because the old lens is the baseline. This is the post-shift contamination. The shift happens successfully, and then you contaminate it with observation from the wrong reference point. You measure the new state using the old identity as the measuring device. And the measurement collapses the new state back to the old one. And you have no idea you're doing it because the checking feels like consciousness. It feels like awareness. It feels like you're being responsible about your transformation. But you're not witnessing the transformation. You're aborting it. Every time you check if you've changed, you confirm you haven't, because the part of you that's checking is the part that hasn't changed. And that part is still running the measurement protocol. So here's the recognition marker for this. After you do your practice, after you access the new frequency, after you feel the shift, do you find yourself monitoring it, checking it, verifying it's real? Do you catch yourself thinking, okay, I feel different, but is this actually going to last? That's the contamination in action. That question just collapsed the shift, because if it was actually integrated, you wouldn't be questioning whether it's going to last. It would just be your current state. There would be nothing to question. The questioning itself is the old identity reasserting itself as the observer. And once it's the observer, it's back in control. Now here's where this gets even more precise. Because the contamination doesn't just happen when you explicitly check. It happens anytime you reference the shift as something separate from you. Anytime you think, I'm being confident now, instead of just being confident, you've created the split. Anytime you notice you're in an elevated state, you've separated yourself from the state. Anytime you're aware that you've shifted, there's an awareness separate from the shift, which means the shift isn't total. Total shift means there's no observer left to notice the shift happened. You're just in the new state, operating from it naturally, without any meta-awareness that you're different. But most people can't sustain that. They shift, And then immediately their old identity kicks in to observe the shift, and the observation kills it. And then they think the technique failed. They think they didn't shift deeply enough. They think they need more practice, more consistency, more belief. The technique worked. The shift happened. What failed was what you did after the shift. You observed it from the old identity, and the observation collapsed it back. So if checking destroys the shift, and observing contaminates it, and monitoring aborts it, what do you do instead? You forget about it. You stop watching yourself. You stop verifying. You let the new state be so completely integrated that there's nothing to observe and no one observing. But here's the problem. Your mind won't let you forget, because your mind is designed to maintain consistency, to track continuity, to make sure you're still you. And that tracking mechanism, that need to remember who you are and verify you're being consistent with it, is exactly what's going to pull you back every single time. Because the mind doesn't just check if you've shifted, it checks if you remember to be the shifted version. And that remembering, that's the next layer of the leak. And it's even more subtle than the checking. We're going there now. Every time you remind yourself to act from your new identity, you're actually reinforcing that you haven't become it yet. The reminder is the resistance. Let me show you what I mean. You've done the work. You've shifted the frequency. You've accessed the new state. And now you're going about your day, and a situation arises, a conversation, a decision, something that requires you to show up. And you think to yourself, remember to be confident here. Remember to act from abundance. Remember you're worthy. That reminder feels helpful. It feels like you're being intentional, like you're consciously choosing to embody the new identity instead of defaulting to the old pattern. But here's what that reminder actually says. Remember to be confident means you're not confident yet. Remember, to act from abundance means your default is still scarcity. Remember you're worthy means you still identify as someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Every reminder presupposes a gap between your current state and the desired state. It assumes you're here trying to get there. It confirms that here is your baseline and there is something you have to reach for. And that gap, that separation between where you are and where you're trying to be, is a quantum declaration. You're telling the field, I am here, attempting to be there, and the field responds to I am here far more powerfully than attempting to be there. Because I am here is a measurement. It's a collapsed state. It's definite present quantum weight behind it. Attempting to be there is potential. It's unmeasured. It's aspirational. It has no quantum coherence yet. When your subconscious processes that reminder, it doesn't hear the intention. It hears the presupposition. It hears that you're not the thing you're trying to be, which confirms the old identity is still active, still baseline, still the reference point. Every reminder reinforces the old identity as your default state. Here's the mechanism. Identity isn't something you remember to perform. Identity is what happens automatically, without thought, without effort, without conscious intention. Your current identity, the one you're trying to shift from, doesn't require reminders. You don't wake up and think, remember to be insecure today. You just are. It's automatic. It's integrated. It's baseline. That's what real identity looks like. It operates without observation, without effort, without conscious maintenance. But the new identity, you have to remind yourself. You have to consciously choose it. You have to remember to embody it, which means it's not actually your identity yet. It's a performance. And performance requires an actor. And the actor is your old identity pretending to be the new one. Let me give you a concrete example. You're in a meeting. Someone challenges you, and you feel that old contraction, the impulse to shrink, to defend, to get small. Then you remember, I'm confident now. I need to respond from confidence. You take a breath. You recalibrate. You respond in a way that feels more aligned with confidence. And you think you just successfully embodied the new identity. But here's what actually happened. Your default response was the contraction. That was automatic. That was baseline. That's your actual identity, showing up without effort. The confident response required effort. It required a reminder. It required you to consciously override the automatic response, which means the automatic response is still your identity. And the confident response is something your old identity is doing. It's a behavior your insecure self is performing to try to seem confident. The old identity is still driving. It's just driving differently, and your subconscious knows this. It registers the effort. It registers the reminder. It registers that confidence is something you have to consciously choose rather than something that just happens, and it files that information under. Confidence is not baseline. Insecurity is baseline. Confidence is a conscious override that requires maintenance. You just reinforce the old identity by needing to remind yourself to act differently. This is the self-reminder paradox. The more you have to remind yourself to be the new version, the more you confirm you're still the old version. Because integrated identity doesn't need reminders. It just is. When you're genuinely confident, you don't think "be confident" here. You just respond from confidence naturally. There's no gap between stimulus and response. No delay where you have to consciously remember who you're supposed to be. The response is automatic because the identity is integrated. But when there's a delay, when there's that moment of, wait, I need to respond differently. I need to remember I'm confident now. That delay is the gap. And the gap is proof the shift hasn't actually happened. Your nervous system is still running the old program as default. The new program is just something you're consciously executing on top of it. And anything that requires conscious execution isn't identity. It's effort. And effort always confirms separation. Here's what makes this so insidious. The reminders feel like progress. They feel like you're being intentional, like you're not just defaulting to old patterns, like you're actively choosing the new identity. And in the moment, they do change your behavior. You do respond differently when you remember to. You do show up differently when you're conscious of it, but you're not operating from a new identity. You're operating from the old identity with conscious behavioral overrides. And behavioral overrides require maintenance. They require attention. They require energy, which means the moment you stop maintaining them, the moment you're tired or distracted or overwhelmed, or just not paying attention, the overrides drop and you're back to baseline, back to the automatic responses, back to the identity that doesn't need reminders. This is why you can be doing well with the new identity for days, and then one stressful situation hits and you completely revert. It's not that you failed. It's that the stress consumed your attention. You stopped consciously maintaining the behavioral overrides, and your actual baseline identity took over, the one that operates automatically. The old one. You weren't being the new identity. You were performing it, and the performance couldn't be sustained when your conscious attention was required elsewhere. Real identity shift means the new responses are automatic. They happen without thought, without reminder, without effort. You don't have to remember to be confident. You just are confident, and the confident response emerges naturally without any conscious intervention. But as long as you're reminding yourself, as long as there's effort involved, you're confirming the new identity is not integrated. It's something you're doing, not something you are. And your subconscious registers that distinction with absolute precision. Here's the recognition marker for this. After your frequency work, after you've accessed the new state, pay attention to your day. How often do you have to consciously remind yourself to be the new version? How often is there a delay between stimulus and response, where you catch yourself starting to react the old way, then course correct? How often do you feel like you're playing a role rather than just being yourself? Every instance of that is a measurement confirming the old identity is still baseline, because if the shift was complete, there would be no reminders. There would be no catching yourself. There would be no course correction. The new responses would just happen automatically because that's who you are now. But most people never get there because they're stuck in the reminder loop. constantly having to remember to be different, constantly monitoring their responses to make sure they're aligned with the new identity, constantly performing the new version, while their actual identity remains unchanged underneath. And then they wonder why the shift doesn't stick, why they keep reverting, why after months of working on themselves, they still have the same automatic reactions in triggering situations. It's because they never shifted identity. They just learned to consciously override their identity when they remember to, and remembering to is the proof it didn't work. Now here's where this gets precise. The reminder mechanism exists because you're using your old identity as the reference point to remember the new identity. There's still a you, the old you, that's trying to remember to act like the new you, which means the old you is still in charge. The new you is just a set of behaviors the old you is attempting to perform. I need to remember I'm confident means there's an I that's separate from confidence, trying to remember to access it. That I is your actual identity. And it's the old one. The new identity isn't something you remember. It's what you are when there's no one left to remember, but your mind can't let go of the remembering. Because your mind is designed to maintain continuity, to track identity across time, to make sure you're being consistent with who you are. And that tracking function is about to reveal the deepest layer of the identity leak. Because your identity isn't just anchored in the past through measurement history. It's anchored in the past through something more fundamental, something that determines not just who you've been, but who you're allowed to become. And once you see what that anchor is, everything about identity shifts will make sense, including why they fail even when you do everything right. We're going there next. You're trying to quantum jump while tethered to historical coordinates. And as long as that tether exists, you're not jumping anywhere. You're just stretching the tether until it snaps you back. So how do you shift when your identity is the anchor preventing the shift? You don't change the identity. You orphan it. You sever the entanglement with your measurement history. You stop defining I am through I have been. You create a discontinuity in your quantum timeline where past measurements no longer determine present state. This is identity orphaning, and it's the only way to create a true quantum shift that doesn't leak back to historical baseline. We're going there now. The shift doesn't happen when you become someone new. It happens when you stop being anchored to who you were. This is identity orphaning, and it's the only way to create a true discontinuity in your quantum timeline. Let me be clear about what this means. You can't shift identity by building on top of the old one. You can't become version 2.0 by upgrading version 1.0, because version 1.0 is the foundation, and the foundation determines what structures can be built on it. Incremental change preserves the core identity signature. You're just adding features to the same operating system. The base code remains the same. True quantum shifts require discontinuity, not progression. They require you to stop being the old version entirely, not improve upon it. And that requires something most transformation teachings will never tell you to do. You have to abandon continuity with your past self. You have to orphan your identity. Here's what that means mechanically. Orphaning is severing the measurement entanglement with your historical self. It's refusing to reference who you've been as evidence for who you are. It's treating your past measurements as irrelevant data that no longer determines your present state. This isn't denial. This isn't spiritual bypassing. This isn't pretending your history doesn't exist. It's recognizing that your history exists as collapsed states that no longer have authority over your present. Quantum state unless you give them that authority by continuing to reference them. Your past only controls your present when you use your past to define your present. Stop using it, and the control ends. Let me show you how this works in practice. Right now, most of your identity statements reference historical data. I'm the kind of person who I've always been. I'm not good at. I tend to. Every one of those statements is a quantum anchor to past measurements. You're defining your present identity through historical evidence, And every time you do that, you're reinforcing the entanglement. You're telling your subconscious, my past measurements are still valid for determining my present state. Your subconscious takes that instruction and continues to collapse you to states that match your history. Identity orphaning means stopping those references entirely. No more I've always been anxious. No more I'm the kind of person who struggles with money. No more I'm not good at relationships. These aren't just limiting beliefs. They're quantum anchors. They're measurement references that keep you entangled with collapsed states. Every time you say them, you're performing a measurement that collapses your present state to match your historical data. Stop saying them. Not because they're negative, because they're past tense identity definitions being applied to your present state. And past tense identity definitions prevent present tense quantum shifts. Here's the protocol for identity orphaning. And this is precise. This is mechanical. This isn't a mindset shift. It's a quantum operation. First, stop referencing historical identity. Catch yourself every time you define who you are through who you've been. Every time you use past behavior as evidence for present capability. Every time you say, I'm someone who, based on historical data. Stop mid-sentence if you have to. Let the statement dissolve. Don't replace it with a positive affirmation. Just let the past tense identity reference drop. No justification. No explanation. Just discontinuity. Your mind will resist this. It will feel disorienting. It will feel like you're losing your sense of self. Good, that's the entanglement weakening. That disorientation is your identity beginning to decohere from your history. Second, cease identity monitoring. Stop checking if you've changed. Stop comparing present you to past you. Stop measuring your progress by referencing who you used to be. Every comparison is a measurement that reestablishes the old identity as the reference point. I used to be insecure. Now I'm more confident. Sounds like progress. But it's actually reinforcing the insecure identity as your baseline by using it as the comparison point. You're defining your present state in relation to your past state, which means your past state still has quantum authority. Identity orphaning means your past state has no authority. It's not the reference point. It's not the comparison. It's not relevant. You're not becoming more confident than you used to be. You're either confident or you're not, independent of any historical data about your confidence. Present state. No comparison, no history, no reference to what was. Third, abandon self-consistency demands. This is the difficult one, because your mind is designed to maintain consistency. It wants you to be true to yourself. It wants your present behavior to match your past behavior, so there's continuity, predictability, coherence. But consistency is just repeated measurement of the same state. It's your subconscious confirming you're still you by checking if you're behaving the same way you always have. Every time you act consistently with your past self, you reinforce the old identity signature. Identity orphaning means being willing to be inconsistent with who you were. It means not worrying about whether your present behavior matches your historical patterns. That's not like me is a statement that reinforces historical identity as the authority. It says your past behavior determines what's like you and what isn't. Stop using that filter. Stop demanding that your present actions be coherent with your past actions. New identity requires you to be unlike yourself from a historical perspective. If your new behavior matches your old behavior, you haven't shifted. You've just stayed in the same state. The shift happens when you're willing to be unrecognizable to your past self. Now here's what happens when you implement this protocol. Without past reference, I am becomes undefined. There's no historical data filling in what that means. There's no measurement history telling you who you are. You're in quantum superposition. Undefined state. Multiple potential identities existing simultaneously without one being collapsed into definiteness. This feels uncomfortable. It feels like groundlessness. Like you don't know who you are anymore. Your mind will panic. It will reach for historical data to restore definition. It will want to collapse back to something familiar. Don't let it. Stay in the undefined state. Stay in superposition, because superposition is where new frequencies can stabilize. When you're no longer anchored to a historical identity, new identity states can form without being compared to the old one, without being measured against past data, without being collapsed back to historical baseline. The new identity forms in a vacuum where the old identity used to be. It emerges from possibility rather than being constructed from history. This is discontinuity. This is true quantum shift. This is identity operating from present state rather than past measurement. And here's what makes this different from every other transformation technique you've tried. Most techniques try to change your identity while keeping you anchored to it. They try to improve the old version, upgrade the old version, heal the old version. But you can't upgrade what you're still identified with, because being identified with it means it's still your reference point. And reference points don't shift. They define what's shifting relative to them. Identity orphaning doesn't try to change the old identity. It severs your attachment to it as a reference point entirely. The old identity still exists as historical data, but it no longer has authority over your present state because you've stopped using it to determine your present state. Without that authority, it can't collapse you back. It can't pull you into historical patterns. It has no measurement weight over your present frequency. You're free to exist in a new state without the rubber band effect pulling you back. This is decoherence by design. You're deliberately decohering your present state from your historical states so they can't entangle and drag you back. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in practice. You're in a situation where the old you would have been anxious. That's the historical pattern. That's the measured response you've had hundreds of times. Without identity orphaning, you'd feel the anxiety start, recognize it as your anxiety, and either try to fight it or surrender to it. Either way, you're identified with it. It's your response. With identity orphaning, you feel the anxiety start and you don't claim it. You don't reference it as evidence of who you are. You don't think I'm anxious or there's my anxiety again. You just observe the sensation without attaching it to identity. It's a response happening, but it's not you. There's no you defined by historical anxiety patterns anymore. Without identity attachment, the anxiety has nothing to anchor to. It arises and then it dissolves because there's no identity structure reinforcing it. You respond to the situation from present state, not from historical pattern. And the response might be completely different from anything you've done before. That's not growth. That's discontinuity. You didn't become less anxious. You stopped being the person whose identity includes anxiety as a defining feature. The anxiety wasn't healed or processed or integrated. It was orphaned. It lost its identity anchor and couldn't sustain itself. This is what identity orphaning actually does. It removes the anchor point that historical patterns use to perpetuate themselves. Without the anchor, the patterns still arise, but they don't stick. They don't define you. They don't collapse your state back to historical baseline. They're just momentary fluctuations in a system that's no longer organized around maintaining consistency with the past. Here's the recognition marker for whether you're actually orphaning or just performing a new identity. After you implement this, do you feel like you don't know who you are anymore? Do you feel groundless, undefined, like you've lost your sense of self? That's successful orphaning. That's the entanglement dissolving. That's superposition. If you feel like you've become a better version of yourself, you haven't orphaned. You've just upgraded while maintaining the same core identity structure. True orphaning feels like dissolution, like the death of who you were. Like there's no solid you to reference anymore. Your mind will interpret this as a crisis. It's not. It's liberation from historical quantum entanglement. Stay in that undefined state. Let it be uncomfortable. Let your mind panic that it can't figure out who you are anymore. Because when your mind can't figure out who you are based on historical data, you're finally free to exist in a state that isn't determined by your past. And that's where the actual quantum shift can stabilize. But here's the final piece that makes this work. Because orphaning creates the space for a new identity to form, but it doesn't guarantee the new identity will stabilize. You can be in superposition, undefined, free from historical anchors, and still collapse back if you do one thing: if you try to maintain continuity between states. If you try to be the same person, experiencing different states, that attempt to maintain continuity is what keeps the leak active even after you've orphaned the historical identity. We're going there now. You think you're a continuous self, having different experiences. You're not. You're different selves pretending to be the same person. And this pretending is what prevents every quantum shift from stabilizing. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, you have a sense that you're the same you who existed yesterday, last week, 10 years ago. There's a feeling of continuity, a thread connecting all these moments into one identity. That feeling is a construction. It's a narrative your nervous system creates by linking states through memory. But at the quantum level, there is no continuous self. There are only collapsed states in each moment. Each moment is a separate measurement, creating a separate configuration. The you of yesterday was a collapsed quantum state with specific eigenvalues. The you of today is a different collapsed state with potentially different eigenvalues. The feeling that these are the same you is your mind creating coherence across discontinuous states. This is the continuity illusion, and it's the identity leak's power source, because here's what happens when you shift frequencies. You access a new state. You're vibrating at a different frequency. You're existing in a different quantum configuration. That shift worked. You're genuinely in a new state, and then you think, I'm still me, just feeling different. That thought that I'm still me just reactivated your old identity signature, because still me means there's a continuous me that persists across states. And that continuous me is defined by your historical identity. The one you're trying to leave, you just subordinated the new frequency to the old identity by claiming they're both you. The new frequency became a temporary state of the old identity rather than a new identity, entirely, and your subconscious processes that accordingly. It registers. New frequency is an experience the old identity is having, not a new identity state, which means the old identity is still baseline. The new frequency is just a mood, a temporary elevation, something that will pass, and it does pass. Because you framed it as temporary by maintaining identity continuity across the shift. Let me give you a concrete example so you can see this in your own experience. You do your practice. You access abundance frequency. You feel it. You're in the state. Then you think, this feels amazing. I'm really feeling abundant today. I'm really feeling abundant today means the same person who usually doesn't feel abundant, am currently experiencing abundance. You just confirmed that non-abundant is your baseline identity, and abundant is a temporary state that identity is experiencing. Your subconscious heard that. It registered the new frequency as subordinate to the old identity. And it will collapse you back to the old identity as soon as the temporary state passes, which it will, because you defined it as temporary by maintaining identity continuity. If you had actually shifted identity, you wouldn't think I'm feeling abundant today. You'd just be in the state with no reference to a you that's separate from the abundance. No, I'm feeling X, just the experience of X with no identity claiming to be having it. But your mind can't operate that way. It needs continuity. It needs a consistent I that persists across changing states. And that need for continuity is what prevents quantum shifts from stabilizing, because quantum shifts aren't continuous. They're discontinuous. They're jumps from one state to another with no smooth transition, but your mind smooths the transition by maintaining identity continuity, by insisting you're the same you in both states, and that insistence collapses the new state back to the old one. Here's the mechanism. When you maintain "I'm still me" across a frequency shift, you're declaring that there's an identity more fundamental than the frequency. An identity that persists regardless of what frequency you're experiencing. And what is that fundamental identity? The one with the most measurement history, the old one. So the old identity becomes the constant, and the new frequency becomes the variable. The thing that changes, while the identity stays the same, which means the identity has authority over the frequency. And the identity with authority is the old one you just gave. The old identity permission to determine which frequencies are temporary and which ones are baseline, and it will always determine that it is baseline and anything else is temporary. This is why you can access elevated states and still snap back. You maintained identity continuity across the elevation, which subordinated the elevated state to your baseline identity. The baseline identity remained in authority. The elevated state was just something it experienced briefly, and authority always reasserts itself. The baseline identity collapses you back to baseline frequency, because that's what baselines do. They define what's normal and what's deviation. Now here's what makes this so insidious. The continuity illusion feels true. It feels like there really is a you that persists across changing states. And from a practical, functional perspective, that continuity is useful. It allows you to navigate reality, make decisions, maintain relationships. But from a quantum perspective, it's fiction. It's your mind creating narrative coherence across discontinuous states. And that fiction is preventing you from making actual quantum jumps. Because a true quantum jump means discontinuity. It means the you in the new state is not the same you as the old state. They're different collapsed configurations, but you can't accept that. You need to be the same person across states. You need continuity. So you force continuity by maintaining an overarching identity that contains both states. And the overarching identity is always the old one, because it has more measurement weight, more history, more quantum coherence. The new state gets absorbed into the old identity as a temporary experience, rather than existing as a separate identity state, and temporary experiences pass. Baseline identities persist. You've rigged the system to prevent quantum shifts by demanding identity continuity across states. Let me show you what this looks like in different contexts. You shift to confidence. You're in the state. Then you think, wow, I'm actually being confident right now. This is different for me. This is different for me means there's a me for which confidence is different. A me that's usually not confident. You just confirmed non-confident is your baseline identity. Confidence is different for that identity, meaning temporary, unusual, not normal. Your subconscious registers this and collapses you back to what's normal for you. Non-confidence, or this. You access abundance frequency. You're in it. Then you notice, I feel so different. Like I'm not even the same person. I'm not even the same person. Sounds like you're recognizing discontinuity. But then you add the kicker. But I know it's still me underneath. Still me underneath, just re-established continuity. There's a me underneath that persists across states. And that me underneath is your historical identity. You just subordinated the abundance frequency to your historical identity. Again, the abundance is something happening to the me underneath, and the me underneath is the one with authority. As soon as you stop actively maintaining the abundance frequency, the me underneath reasserts itself, because it's the baseline. The abundance was just a temporary state it experienced. This happens constantly. You shift, then immediately re-establish continuity with the old identity, and the shift aborts. And you don't even realize you're doing it because maintaining continuity feels natural. It feels necessary. It feels like basic identity coherence, but it's the mechanism preventing quantum shifts from stabilizing. Here's the recognition marker. After you shift, pay attention to how you think about the shift. Do you reference yourself as still you, experiencing something different? Do you notice the shift as something unusual or different from normal? Do you maintain a sense of me that's separate from the shifted state? Every instance of that is continuity maintenance, and continuity maintenance prevents discontinuity. And discontinuity is what quantum shifts require. You can't jump to a new state while maintaining identity continuity with the old state, because the continuity is the tether pulling you back. So what's the alternative? How do you shift without maintaining continuity? You don't think of it as you shifting. You let the old identity dissolve and a new one emerge without claiming they're the same you. Each frequency is its own observer, its own I am, its own collapsed state. When you're in abundance frequency, there's no you experiencing abundance. There's just the abundant state existing as its own configuration. When you're in confidence frequency, there's no you being confident. There's just the confident state as its own reality. No continuous identity claiming ownership of different states. Just different states existing as separate configurations. This sounds like dissociation. It's not. Dissociation is fragmenting one identity into parts. This is recognizing there never was one identity, just different collapsed states, your mind narratively linked into a continuous self. You're not creating fragments. You're stopping the artificial linking that creates the illusion of continuity. And when you stop creating continuity, quantum shifts can actually shift, because there's no baseline identity to snap back to. There's no underneath me that persists. There are just different states, and you exist as whichever state is collapsed in this moment. When the moment changes, the state can change completely, without reference to what was, without continuity, without a persistent you that has to remain the same. This is quantum discontinuity as an identity protocol, and it's uncomfortable. Your mind will resist violently, because your mind's job is to create continuity, to maintain a consistent sense of self across time. Asking it to stop doing that feels like asking it to dissolve your identity entirely, but your identity isn't what you think it is. It's not a persistent entity. It's a pattern of measurement your mind narratively links into a continuous story. Stop telling the story, and the pattern can change without resistance, because the resistance is coming from the continuity demand. The insistence that you must be the same person who experiences different things. You don't have to be the same person. You can be different collapsed states in different moments. And the new states can stabilize because there's no old identity claiming authority over them. No continuity, no baseline, no still me, just present state existing without reference to past state. This is how quantum shifts stabilize without leaking. Not by maintaining consistency with who you were, but by allowing complete discontinuity with who you were. Different state, different identity, different collapsed configuration, not the same you growing or changing. Different yous existing in different moments with no persistent identity linking them. And when there's no persistent identity to maintain, the shift doesn't have to maintain itself against baseline. It just is the baseline for as long as that state is collapsed. Then when you collapse into a different state, that becomes baseline. No reference to what was, no comparison. No continuity demand, just present configuration existing without historical anchor. That's where the leak stops. When there's no continuity to maintain, there's nothing to leak back to. But this only works if the new state actually locks in. If it becomes your automatic baseline rather than something you're consciously maintaining. And that locking mechanism is precise. It's mechanical. And it happens in a very specific way that nobody talks about. We're going there now. A quantum shift doesn't need to be maintained. It needs to be forgotten. Maintenance is measurement. Forgetting is integration. Let me explain what that means. Right now, when you shift to a new frequency, you're aware of it. You're monitoring it. You're maintaining it. You're checking if it's still there. All of that is observation. And observation at the quantum level causes decoherence. The more you observe the new state, the more you destabilize it. Because observation requires an observer, and the observer is your old identity measuring the new state. Every measurement risks collapsing the new state back to the old one. The shift stabilizes when you stop observing it, when you stop maintaining it, when you forget you ever shifted. Because when you forget you shifted, there's no observer left to measure the shift. There's no one checking if it's working, no one monitoring progress, no one maintaining the frequency. The new state just is. Without observation, without maintenance, without conscious effort, that's field lock. That's when a new frequency becomes your actual baseline instead of something you're trying to hold. And it happens in 3 distinct phases. Each phase has different mechanics, different risks, different requirements. Let me walk you through them. Phase 1, superposition. 0 to 72 hours. This is immediately after the shift. You've accessed the new frequency. You're in a different state. But you're also still entangled with the old state. You exist in both simultaneously. Superposition, the new state and the old identity, are both active, both possible, both exerting influence. This phase is maximally unstable. Any observation can collapse you back to the old state because the old state still has measurement weight, still has coherence, still has quantum authority. The new state is fresh, unmeasured, no stability yet. It's pure potential that hasn't been reinforced by repeated measurement. During this phase, one rule: zero identity checking. Don't ask if the shift worked. Don't monitor how you're feeling. Don't check if you're different. Don't compare yourself to how you were before. Every check is a measurement from the old identity, and every measurement from the old identity risks collapsing you back. Just be in the new state. Act from it. Respond from it. Without referencing it, without observing it, without verifying it. Let it be so total that there's no separation between you and the state. No observer watching the state. Just the state itself, unmeasured. The more you can exist in the new frequency without observing yourself in it, the more it begins to accumulate its own measurement weight. Every action from the new state is a measurement that reinforces it. But the measurement has to be unconscious, automatic, not monitored. The moment you consciously think, "I'm acting from the new state," you've created observer-observed duality again. You've separated yourself from the state and positioned the old identity as the one observing. Don't do that. Just act, just respond. Just be, without commentary, without observation, without checking. This is the critical 72 hours. Most people lose the shift here because they can't resist checking. They can't resist verifying it's real. They can't resist monitoring their progress. And every check collapses them back. If you make it through 72 hours without collapsing, if you can exist in the new state without observing yourself in it, you move to phase 2. Phase 2, partial decoherence, 3 to 21 days. The new frequency has some stability now. It's been reinforced by several days of unconscious measurement. It has momentum. It's starting to feel normal. But the old identity hasn't fully released yet. It's weakened, but it's still there. Still exerting influence, still trying to reassert itself as baseline. This phase is where most people think they've succeeded, and that's exactly when they fail. Because the shift feels stable enough that you start to relax. You start to reference it. You start to check how it's going. You start to measure your progress. "I've been confident for a week now. This is really working." That statement just reactivated the old identity as the observer measuring the week of confidence. And the old identity, once reactivated as observer, starts to exert collapse pressure again. You didn't notice, but you just handed control back to the old identity by making it the one evaluating whether the shift is working. This is the phase where the temptation to verify is strongest. Because the shift feels real enough that you want confirmation. You want to know it's permanent. You want to measure how far you've come. Don't. Every measurement delays stabilization. The new state needs to become so normal, so automatic, so integrated that you stop thinking about it entirely. You stop noticing you're different. You stop referencing that you shifted. It just becomes how you are, with no conscious awareness that you're being different from before. When you can go a full day without once thinking about the shift, without once checking how you're doing, without once comparing yourself to how you used to be, that's when you're approaching field lock. But if you're still mentally tracking your progress, still aware that you're being different, still referencing the shift as something separate from your baseline, you're still in partial decoherence. The old identity still has measurement authority. The new state is still something you're doing rather than something you are. Phase 2 requires you to lose interest in the shift, to stop caring whether it's working, to stop monitoring yourself, not because you're giving up, because caring is observing, and observing maintains the observer-observed split, and the split prevents full integration. You have to forget you shifted. You have to forget there was ever an old version. You have to exist so completely in the new state that there's no reference to it being new. Most people can't do this. They want to track their progress. They want to know they're succeeding. They want to verify the shift is stable, and that wanting prevents the shift from stabilizing. Because the shift stabilizes when you don't care anymore, when it's so integrated that checking seems pointless because this is just how you are now. If you can maintain non-observation for 21 days, if you can exist in the new state without checking, measuring, or referencing it for 3 weeks, you enter Phase 3. Phase 3, field lock, 21 days and beyond. The new frequency is baseline now. It's your default. It's automatic. It requires zero conscious maintenance. You're not being confident, you're just confident. It's not something you're doing. It's what you are. You don't think about it. You don't monitor it. You don't maintain it. It's integrated so deeply that it operates below conscious awareness. This is field lock. The new state has replaced the old state as your default collapsed configuration. Your subconscious now recognizes this frequency as baseline. It has measurement weight. It has coherence. It has quantum authority. And because it's baseline, it doesn't require observation to maintain. It just is. Here's how you know you've reached field lock. You can't remember why you ever thought you needed to shift. The old state feels foreign, like it was someone else, like it was a lifetime ago. You don't reference it. You don't compare to it. You don't think I used to be X and now I'm Y. You just are Y. And X is so distant, so irrelevant, that it doesn't factor into your sense of self at all. When someone who knew you before comments on how much you've changed, you're genuinely confused. Because from your internal experience, you haven't changed. This is just how you are. How you've always been, as far as your current state is concerned. That's full integration. That's field lock. That's when the quantum shift has stabilized completely. But here's the paradox that makes this work. The shift stabilizes when you stop caring about whether it's stabilized. As long as you're monitoring, checking, verifying, you're maintaining the observer-observed split. You're keeping the old identity active as the observer. You're preventing full integration. The shift locks in when you forget about the shift. When it becomes so normal that observing it seems as strange as observing yourself breathing. You don't check if you're still breathing. You just breathe, automatically, without thought, without observation. That's what integrated identity looks like. You don't check if you're still confident. You just are confident automatically, without thought, without observation. Maintenance is measurement. Measurement is observation from an external reference point. And observation from an external reference point prevents the thing being observed from becoming your internal baseline. You can't make something your baseline while simultaneously observing whether it's your baseline. Because the observation confirms it's not baseline yet, it's still something separate being checked. Baseline doesn't get checked, it just is. So the protocol for field lock is counterintuitive. You don't try to make the shift stick. You try to forget you shifted. You don't maintain the new frequency. You stop paying attention to it entirely. You don't verify it's working. You assume it's so completely integrated that verification is irrelevant. And in assuming that, in acting as if it's already baseline, in forgetting to check, it actually becomes baseline, not because you believed it into existence, because you stopped observing it, which allowed it to stabilize without measurement interference. This is quantum mechanics playing out in identity. Unmeasured states can exist in superposition. Measured states collapse to definite values based on the observer. If you keep measuring the new state, you keep collapsing it based on your observer, which is your old identity. If you stop measuring it, it can stabilize into its own definite state without external interference. The new state becomes the observer. It becomes the lens you see through, not the thing being seen through the old lens. And when that flip happens, when the new state becomes the observer rather than the observed, that's field lock. You're not observing confidence from insecurity. You're observing reality from confidence. Confidence is the baseline consciousness, not the thing being checked by another consciousness. That shift in observational position is what makes the change permanent. And it only happens when you stop trying to make it permanent. When you stop checking if it's permanent. When you forget to care whether it's permanent. Because it's so integrated that permanence isn't a question. Here's the recognition marker for field lock versus maintenance. If you're still aware that you're being different, you're maintaining. The shift hasn't locked. If you're still pleased with yourself for changing, you're maintaining. The shift hasn't locked. If you're still noticing how much better you feel compared to before, you're maintaining. The shift hasn't locked. Field lock means you're not aware of being different. You're not pleased with yourself for changing. You're not comparing to before. You're just being. And being doesn't require awareness, doesn't generate pride, doesn't invite comparison. It just is. When you reach that point, when the new state just is without any meta-awareness of it being new, that's when it can't leak back, because there's no observer maintaining it. There's no old identity checking it. There's no separation between you and the state. The state is you, completely, without remainder, and you is baseline. Baseline doesn't leak. It doesn't require maintenance. It doesn't need to be checked. It's just what is. That's the end point of a quantum shift. Not becoming someone new, forgetting you were ever anyone else. But here's the final insight that changes everything. About this process, every identity, including the improved one, is still a limitation. Every defined identity state is still a collapsed waveform with boundaries. The ultimate quantum shift isn't becoming a better version of yourself. It's operating from no fixed identity at all, and that's where we're going next. Every identity is a limitation, including the improved one. The ultimate quantum shift isn't becoming a better version of yourself. It's operating from no fixed identity at all. This is the null state, and it's the only frequency that can't leak. Let me show you why. Every identity you can define is a collapsed quantum state. I am confident. I am abundant. I am powerful. Each of these is a definite state with specific eigenvalues, specific parameters, specific boundaries, and boundaries are limitations. When you say I am confident, you're collapsing yourself into a configuration where confidence is a defining feature, which immediately excludes configurations where confidence isn't present. You've created a binary. You're either being confident or you're not being true to your identity. Same with any identity definition. I'm abundant means abundance is now a requirement for identity coherence. Any experience of scarcity becomes identity incoherent, which triggers the immune response we discussed earlier. Every defined identity creates limitations on which states you can access without triggering incoherence. You think upgrading your identity removes limitations. It doesn't. It just changes which limitations you're operating under. The insecure identity was limited. The confident identity is also limited, just differently limited, and any limited identity can leak. Because any defined state can decohere when conditions change, when stress increases, when the environment shifts. You've just replaced one vulnerable collapsed state with another vulnerable collapsed state. Both are improvements over randomness. Both are better than chaos, but both are still fixed points that can destabilize. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say you successfully shift to confident identity. You've integrated it. It's locked in. It's baseline. Now you enter a situation where confidence is genuinely inappropriate, where humility is required, where not knowing is the correct response. Your confident identity has to override its own baseline to access those states, which creates internal friction, which requires effort, which means you're fighting your own identity to respond appropriately, or you remain confident in situations where confidence is maladaptive, and you misread the situation entirely. Either way, the fixed identity is limiting your range of appropriate responses. You've traded insecurity's limitations for confidence's limitations. Better trade, yes, but still limited. Now imagine a different configuration. Not confident identity, not insecure identity, no fixed identity at all, just presence, just awareness, just responsiveness to what each moment requires, without any identity structure determining the response in advance. You're in a situation that requires confidence. Confidence arises naturally, without effort, without reference to "I am confident." You're in a situation that requires humility. Humility arises naturally, without effort, without reference to "I am humble." No fixed identity means no fixed limitations. You can access any frequency as needed, because there's no identity structure restricting which frequencies are coherent for you. This is the null identity state. And it's not what most people think it is. It's not being nobody. It's not dissociation. It's not spiritual bypassing or identity dissolution in a pathological sense. It's operating from no fixed collapsed state. Remaining in superposition, being any configuration that serves the present moment without any configuration being you. Let me show you how this works mechanically. Every fixed identity is a collapsed waveform. When you identify as anything confident, abundant, powerful, whatever, you've performed a quantum measurement that collapsed infinite potential into one definite state. That state is now you, and you has boundaries, eigenvalues, parameters, things that are coherent with the state and things that aren't. Those boundaries protect identity coherence, but they also limit range. The null state refuses the collapse. It remains in superposition. It doesn't identify as any particular configuration, which means it can access all configurations as needed. No. Fixed you means no fixed boundaries, means no fixed limitations. You become field responsive rather than identity consistent. Here's what that looks like in practice. Someone challenges you. Instead of responding from "I am confident" or "I am insecure," you respond from no identity at all. You assess the situation. You access whatever frequency serves the moment. You respond. No identity filter determining the response. No, is this consistent with who I am? Check. Just direct response from present conditions. The response might be assertive. It might be soft. It might be confrontational. It might be receptive. You don't know in advance because you're not referencing a fixed identity to determine it. The moment determines the response, not your identity. This is liberation from identity as a limiting structure. You're no longer defending a self-concept, no longer maintaining consistency with who you are, no longer checking if your actions align with your identity. You're just responding, moment to moment, configuration to configuration, without any configuration being you. Now here's why this is the only state that can't leak. Every fixed identity can decohere. Every collapsed state can destabilize under the right conditions. But the null state isn't collapsed. It's not fixed. It's not a definite configuration that can destabilize. It's superposition itself. And superposition doesn't leak because there's no definite state to leak from. You can't snap back to a baseline when there is no baseline. You can't collapse to an old identity when you're not identified with any particular state. Each moment is a fresh configuration. Each situation evokes a fresh response. Nothing is being maintained. Nothing is being held. Nothing is baseline that can be returned to. This is quantum freedom, not better identity. No identity. Let me be clear about what this isn't. This isn't spiritual bypassing where you pretend you don't have patterns or conditioning or history. Those exist. Those are real. This isn't dissociation where you disconnect from yourself or your experience. You're fully present, fully responsive. This isn't identity diffusion where you don't know who you are and it causes dysfunction. You know exactly who you are in each moment. You're the configuration that's appropriate to this moment. The null state is precise. It's functional. It's highly responsive. It's just not fixed. You're not someone trying to respond appropriately. You're the appropriate response itself, without a separate someone doing the responding. No observer-observed split. No identity performing actions. Just action arising from present conditions without an identity claiming ownership of it. This sounds abstract. Let me make it concrete. Right now you have identity stories. I'm confident, or I'm insecure, or I'm someone who struggles with X. Those stories determine your responses before situations arise. You know how you will respond because you know who you are. Null state means you don't know how you'll respond until the response arises, because there's no you with predictable patterns. There's just responsiveness. Someone insults you. Fixed identity checks. Am I someone who tolerates this? Am I someone who fights back? Then responds based on identity. Null state doesn't check. The situation evokes a response directly. The response might be fierce, or it might be indifferent, or it might be playful. You don't know in advance because there's no identity template determining it. The response is pure emergence from present conditions. Not identity filtered. Not consistency checked, not self-concept maintained, just response, clean, direct, unmediated by identity structure. This is what actually stops the identity leak, not building a better identity. Releasing identity as an operational structure entirely. No identity to leak from, no baseline to return to, no collapsed state to decohere, just present. Configuration moment to moment with no thread of continuity, demanding. Consistency across configurations. You're different in every moment because different moments evoke different configurations. And none of those configurations is you. They're just what's arising. When there's no you to defend, maintain or verify, the entire identity maintenance system shuts down. No more immune responses protecting identity coherence. No more measurement checks confirming you're still you. No more collapse back to baseline. Because there is no baseline. This is operating from the field itself, rather than from a fixed point within the field. You're not a wave trying to become a better wave. You're the ocean experiencing itself as different waves moment to moment. No wave is you. All waves are you. You is the field itself, not any particular configuration within it. Here's the practice for accessing null state. Every time you're about to act, catch yourself checking, is this consistent with who I am? That question presupposes a fixed who I am that actions must align with. That presupposition is what maintains fixed identity. Don't answer the question. Let it dissolve. Act without knowing if it's consistent with who you are. Without checking if it's like you or unlike you. Just act based on what the moment is calling for. Without identity justification, without self-consistency demands. Why did I do that? Not because I'm someone who does that. Not because that's consistent with my values. Just because it was the response the moment required. No identity story justifying the action. The action stands alone, justified by the situation itself, not by identity coherence. Do this consistently, and you'll notice something strange. You'll stop knowing who you are in the way you used to. You won't be able to predict your responses. You won't have a stable self-concept you can reference. You won't have consistent patterns you identify with. This will feel groundless. It will feel like you're losing yourself. You're not losing yourself. You're losing the fixed structure that was limiting what yourself could be. You're becoming responsive rather than consistent. Field dynamic rather than identity stable. And in that responsiveness, the identity leak stops. Because there's no identity to leak from. You're just configurations arising and dissolving moment to moment. Each configuration appropriate to its moment. None of them you. The you that could leak, the fixed identity that could decohere is gone. Not repressed, not bypassed, just recognized as unnecessary. You don't need a fixed identity to function. You need presence, responsiveness, the ability to access whatever frequency serves the moment. And that ability isn't hindered by fixed identity. It's freed by releasing it. This is the final identity shift. Not upgrading who you are. Recognizing you're not who you are. You're the space where configurations appear. You're the field where identities arise and dissolve. You're the awareness in which all states are possible, not any particular state. The possibility itself, and possibility can't leak. Because it's not a collapsed state to begin with. It's the field from which all collapsed states emerge. You're not becoming the field. You're recognizing you are always the field, pretending to be a fixed wave. Stop pretending. Be the field, and watch what happens when there's no fixed identity left to sabotage your quantum shifts. Nothing shifts, because nothing was ever fixed to begin with. You just stop collapsing yourself into limitation and remain as infinite responsive potential. That's not a quantum shift. That's quantum nature itself. And it can't leak because there's nowhere to leak to. You're already everywhere, appearing as anything, being nothing in particular. The identity leak stops when there's no identity to leak from. And the you reading this? Not who you are, just a configuration that's arising to read these words. Let it dissolve when you're done. Don't claim it. Don't maintain it. Don't turn it into a new fixed identity. Just be. Without definition, without boundary, without the need to know who you are. That not knowing is the only frequency that can't be sabotaged, because there's no one there to sabotage. Just presence. Just response. Just this moment's configuration arising from the infinite field of what's possible. Be that. Not any particular expression of it. The field itself. And the identity leak, along with the identity that was leaking, vanishes completely. Not because you fixed it, because you recognized it was never real to begin with.